Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Gather podcast. I have a very special guest with me today. This is none other than the wonderful Alex Dawson. Welcome.
Thank you, Maria. I'm so excited to be here.
How are you feeling? It's Saturday morning.
Great. You made me one of your amazing special coffees, so I'm very ready to talk about poetry.
Amazing. I feel like coffee and poetry is just such a great combination. There's name a better combination, right?
I can't think of one. It's like an age-old tradition.
It absolutely is. Well, it's been a long time coming since we've started getting to know each other and connecting online and then meeting in person. What has it been now? 3 years maybe?
I think 2.5, 3. I think the first time we kind of connected, I found you through your bathtub poem, that beautiful, famous piece. And I was like, wow, this girl is really talented. So then I followed you, and then you followed me back, which was awesome. You know, when you find someone you think is cool online and they follow you back and you're like, oh, me?
This whole thing.
And I was just posting wildlife photos at the time. I wasn't posting poetry yet, but you liked my photos, and then you bought one of my calendars. So I don't think we actually met when I dropped it off, but then you started Gather. And I was like, I want to write poetry with Maria, and the rest is history.
The rest is history. I feel like the time goes so quickly. When you meet someone online, I feel like there's an immediate almost energy that happens online, and then when you meet that person, you never really know is that going to translate? But it was just like catching up with an old friend the moment I met you in real life.
I know, the moment we met, I was like, wow, we are on the same wavelength. We're interested in the same things. We're both very bubbly and extroverted, which isn't every poet, to be honest. Which there's a range of characteristics, but a lot of poets are more reserved, more quiet, more introverted. But we both are really chatty and energetic. So instantly I was like, oh, she's so fun. I just felt I described this to my husband actually. I was like, my dynamic with Maria is so effervescent. It feels we're just floating in two little bubbles, talking about poetry. And then we both have the very grounded, rational partners to balance it all out. And I think that's just really fun and something we have in common.
I think you described that perfectly. Effervescent, bubbly, overflowing, and then we have our type A partners who
who are sitting
us.
right here shaking their heads or nodding their heads. Actually, they know.
We need
need
someone
that balance.
Yeah, we need
really
someone
do.
to bring us back down to earth. It's so funny you say that, because earlier this year in May, I had the privilege and the joy of interviewing Isabel. Isabel is our community coordinator in Gather, and her husband, her boyfriend, Carlos, is the exact same. He's grounded, he's calm, he's collected. I feel like every poet needs that.
We really need that. Honestly, the rock. I'm always I'm a little Pisces, flowing through the river of life, and then my husband is occasionally a dam that stops me, but in the best way. Maybe you shouldn't do that. A little Pisces, slow down. Let's think about the logical scenario. It helps.
Absolutely. I feel like it's interesting though, Alex, because you have a wonderful book out.
Yes.
Your book came out last summer. So I'm curious, I guess, how you navigated feeling like this bubbly, effervescent poet and then translating that energy into organizing a book and stuff, because I think those are sometimes two very different energies.
They are.
And do you have any advice for anyone that's looking to publish their first book, who is also an effervescent soul?
That is such an insightful question, actually, because that's something I really struggle with. I am not necessarily by nature a very organized person. I'm very spontaneous. I'm very live in the moment. I'm very go with the flow. And I had to force myself, not in an unpleasant way, just in a somewhat unnatural way, to really focus on my book, which I have right here. What do you know? Yeah, my book, All These Living Things. The fun part about my book is that it's a mix of my wildlife photography and my poetry. So I already had a bank of wildlife photography, and I'm always out in the forest taking photos. When I decided I wanted to write this book, I started sitting down and writing more poems directly after I had an encounter with wildlife, and it was really, really lovely and inspirational to be able to translate my encounters in the wild directly into poetry in the moment. Like in my book, I have like photos and then side by side with poems. Not to like totally plug my book right now, but we're doing it anyways.
It's gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you. It was a really, I felt like a pretty unique way to put together a poem, and wildlife and nature and conservation is something I'm so passionate about. And I also was able to tie in other themes just through kind of my reflections on my encounters with nature and how they relate to themes of serendipity or relationships, or for me, nature is a massive teacher. So the wisdom that I derive from nature was a huge part of this too. But back to your question, any poets that are looking to put together a book, I would say that what worked really well for me was having a deadline. And actually sharing my deadline with people so that I was accountable to it. If I have a deadline and I just set it for myself because I'm so good with the flow, I'll just be like, this is not real. Like, I'll bump this by a month, whatever. But once I started sharing it with people, I was like, okay, I better actually do this. And then I started just like getting organized, like organizing everything in Google Docs, pairing photos to poems, and filling in the gaps thematically of kind of where I wanted my book to go. And it was almost like I just had to, I had to shapeshift into another part of my personality that I don't often access, because that part is actually there. When I was in high school, I was a really big keener. I was very organized. I was like very, very academic, and it still exists in me. It's just, it's not where I've chosen to live in the last 15 years of my life, because I'd rather have fun.
Yeah.
And organization can be fun for some people. It's just not like as fun for me. So it was just about going in a different direction a little bit for myself.
I think that's such a wise way to approach it, like separating the organized, sort of more structured personality versus the creative free flowing. And one of the pieces of advice I often give poets is to separate your writing from your editing, because I find that you access different parts of your brain through those two different activities, and you can't really complete those two things effortlessly from the same brain space. And so I think that's really good advice, to access a part of yourself. It's not likely going to be the same part of yourself that you wrote the poems, to then also create and compile the whole collection as a whole. Because it's really hard work, especially if you're self-publishing. You have to set those deadlines for yourself. You have to sort of be disciplined. Like, it's not an easy thing. There's a reason a lot of people don't self-publish, because you're doing everything by yourself. You don't have someone, you don't have a team behind you. So it's sort of like managing those expectations and taking things like at a time. I think also like knowing yourself, knowing what timeline you're comfortable with, knowing like, can I complete this in 6 months, or do we need to, extend it to like a year or so?
For me, it also did help because I'm a teacher. Really the only time that I have to like compile a manuscript is in the summer. So it helped to kind of be forced within the constraints of my own work schedule to do that. I will say also, to what you were just speaking about, I think that there are like different aspects to our personality that really can correspond better to different parts of writing. Like, I do separate my writing and my editing. Definitely for me, like, just to talk a little bit about process, I am always editing as I go. Like, I don't often just like write a poem fully without changing words or lines as I go. I think some people do that, which is very cool, but it's like this, when I'm in a writing space and I'm writing a poem, it feels like I've almost stepped into a different world entirely. I don't know if you have the same experience. It's almost out of body, where it's like I don't know, it's almost disassociative. Where,
in a way.
It's like I'm writing and I am myself, but I'm not myself. It's like, this is going to sound really granola for a moment, but I am granola, so we're going to go with it. It's like I'm channeling something, some creative spirit. I think it was Elizabeth Gilbert. Do you know her? Like, she's so amazing, who spoke about channeling like a creative spirit that passes through you and then maybe passes on to someone else or something like that. And I don't swear by that religiously, because I do also think that discipline and work ethic and honing your craft every day is such a part of like building yourself as a writer. But I do definitely like feel something otherworldly when I'm writing something and I'm really in the zone with it.
Absolutely. I think it should feel that way, to be honest. And I think if it's not feeling that, like if you're really struggling to write poetry and you're struggling to want to write poetry, then this might be very controversial to say. I don't think you should. I think, like, no, seriously, like, I think if it doesn't feel like joyous and exciting, and it's not always going to feel that way. There are going to be times in your life where you need to, you know, discipline yourself a little bit and get your butt in your office chair and write your poetry. But if it's like pulling teeth to get you to write a poem, then I don't think maybe you need to write creative nonfiction or fiction or something. I don't think, I think it should feel like that exciting calling to you, like feeling that otherworldly, almost like channeling as you're writing it, especially most of the time anyways, maybe not always.
Like, I will say in regards to that, there are times when I sit down to write and it's just not coming.
For sure.
And in those moments, I don't really force it. Like, I'll try for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'll just be like, do you know what? I'm not in a writing mood today,
it's not
or in
gonna
this
happen
moment.
today.
And so I'm not going to force it. I'm just going to put the pen down. But I will also say there have been other times, like when I wrote recently one of my favorite poems ever, I wasn't feeling at all like I was capable of writing anything. I was feeling very dramatically, as a poet does, like I would never write again. It was just like a really busy time of life. I was getting over a cold. You know, I just wasn't in the headspace. And then I sat down in a pizzaiolo with like a slice of like rapini and sausage beside like a stanky old bathroom. And I sat down with my pen and I started writing. Okay, that's a lie. It was on my iPhone. And I wrote something in like 10 minutes and I loved it. And there was nothing about what I wrote in that moment that was necessarily influenced by what was happening in my life in the time or anything like that. I started by writing a line and then I just continued with it. And afterwards I was like, I literally sat down thinking I had nothing to say, and I had something to say. And that's also really cool and possible.
Absolutely. I think that's like such a great example of an abundance mindset of like, I will always have something to say. I will always, there's like enough poems out there. I'm going to have 1,000 poems to write. And I heard an interview in the Paris Review and they posted it on their Instagram, and I don't remember who they were interviewing, but someone said the earlier and the faster you can accept that you will not write a lot of great poems in your lifetime, the better. And I was like fuming when I read this. I was like, I don't think that's like,
excuse me?
With that attitude, you won't write amazing poems.
How dare you tell me that about myself?
I know. I think like the way you think about opportunity and abundance shapes your reality,
For
like
sure.
1,000%. So I think keeping in mind, like, there are a million great poems that I haven't written yet, and I'm never going to run out of things to write about. I even have to remind myself this as the facilitator of Gather. I have to remind myself that there are endless topics to explore in poetry, that I'm never going to run out of amazing things to talk about, amazing things to teach. Like, all I have to do is go back and discover a new one every week. And that's going to be my life's work. So I'm never going to run out. But
I admire you for that. Oh, I don't want to interrupt.
Thank you. No, it's
but
okay.
Like so many other people, because I've been in Gather now for like over a year, and so many other people would have created like 20 lessons and put them on repeat because it's easier and because it's maybe, you know, more cost effective, so to speak. But you don't do that. You come up with something original every time, and because of that, you've cultivated such a loyal base of Gather writers, because we're always excited. We know it will be something new and interesting every time, you know, we come to write with you. I think that's so cool.
That's so kind of you to say. I'm so glad that you're like having a good time and like you never know, you know?
Gather sucks. I just came here to say that. Don't join. Can you imagine?
Oh my God. I truly though, it feels so nice to hear that. I think like, you know, as humans, we need sometimes that recognition and that just validation that you're on the right track and you're doing the right thing. So
for sure.
I really appreciate that.
For sure. Like you're in a facilitation position as like Gather, you know, guru, the mother of Gather, and like a teaching position. And I'm a teacher too. Mm-hmm. And like as a teacher, like fortunately I teach an extremely loving, grateful, kind audience, which is adult refugees. I'm an adult ESL teacher, but I know that especially these days, a lot of other teaching roles aren't as gratifying. Like teaching teenagers these days, like it's hard. I've heard from fellow teachers that it's extra hard with like phone addiction, and things like that. So I'm always here to like uplift a fellow teacher, a fellow facilitator. I think it's just such wonderful work to be out there like inspiring other people, you know?
I truly think it's like the most important thing that I've ever done in my life. And I mean that like wholeheartedly. I am curious though, how has becoming a teacher and teaching this wonderful classroom of students, how has that impacted your writing and vice versa? Like, do you find that they speak to each other? Are they in conversation with each other?
So I teach level 3. Oh, I thought you meant my students. They talk to each other. I was like, well, I teach level 3 English. So not really, actually. Like a little bit patchwork English. I do write poems that are related to teaching refugees. I'm extremely, extremely, extremely passionate about that work. Like I've always really been passionate about trying to advocate for refugees. You know, I can't think of anything more horrible than somebody losing their home, everything they've ever known, losing loved ones maybe, or being persecuted for who they are and forced to flee their country. And then coming here and facing hatred or facing discrimination, people that don't want them here, like it hurts my heart to think about. Yeah. I've always kind of rooted for the underdog. So I think that it really ties into the sense of empathy that really impacts a lot of my work in every aspect of my life. Not to sit here and be like, I'm so nice. But, you know, I have been told, we'll say, that I'm a pretty empathetic person.
I think you are.
And my empathy does really pour into my writing. A lot of my writing is about social issues, or there's an element of that comes in. But I also have written about my students, and I've written about, you know, my feelings around discrimination towards refugees and the refugee experience. So, yeah, I think they do absolutely relate.
Yeah, no, I think that's like you nailed that on the head. When I think about your writing, you are writing from a place of empathy. Thank you. I think that's why so many people compare your work to Mary Oliver's, because her writing is very much based on like she's observing the world, having empathy and writing about it. Yeah. And I think very much you embody that same practice. Is that what writing poetry to you is? Is it like a practice of empathy and a recording of that empathy? Or if you had to describe sort of like your practice of poetry, your philosophical view of poetry, what do you think poetry is?
I love that question. And thank you, by the way, for saying my writing is like Mary Oliver. She's one of my favorite poets. I mean, she's one of many people's favorite poets. So thank you for that. I would say yes, regarding empathy, but also I think when I sit down to write a poem, what I'm really looking to do is just be honest. Unless I have an assignment for myself where I'm trying to tell the truth, but tell it slant, you know, Emily Dickinson style, which I think I still do when I'm trying to be honest, because I will write something I've been thinking about, some honest reflection on my life or what I've observed in the world, but then I will tell it slant through metaphor, through alliteration, through personification. You know, I will find a way to tell it in a different way. So I think I'm like fundamentally, when I sit down to write, I'm just really trying to say something that's true for me and hoping that by doing so and by being as authentic as I can in that, it will also be true for other people and they will resonate with that work. And I think through that, there's empathy, because writing poetry is an empathetic act, I think, because it is also a selfish act, right? Because you're sitting down and you're maybe, for me, it has always been cathartic, that this is therapeutic, cathartic for me to write down my thoughts. But in doing so, maybe I can reach someone who's going through something difficult, and maybe I can help them. Maybe they'll take my poem and they'll go back to it when they're struggling. And that's really empathetic in its own way, and really kind and generous. And I love that about writing.
I think that's so cool that you touched on the idea that it's ironically both selfish and generous to write poetry.
It is.
And I
so
completely...
is teaching, by the way.
Yes, absolutely. You're giving, but you're also just receiving pretty much as much as you're giving. I'm trying to think about my poetry, and I think my poetry started off very selfish. I started writing poetry when I was like, I think my first real poem was in grade 8. And then, you know, in high school, I had a wonderful creative writing teacher, and I wrote many of my first versions of some of my first published poems were written in high school. And I wrote for like one reason only, which was no one in my life listened to me. The page listened, and the page didn't judge me. Aww. And so in a way, it was very, very cathartic and very cathartic. Beautiful. But it was for me. It was very, you know, I guess, quote unquote, selfish. But I find that as I am progressing in my poetry journey, maybe I'm starting to lean less cathartic and more empathetic. And I'm finding poetry lately for me has felt more like play. It's felt more like I'm going onto the page and I'm discovering different ways of saying certain things. And it isn't always true to the matter of the fact of the story, but it's true to like my poeticness and my sensibility and what I find to be perhaps like the beautiful truth, if that makes sense.
I love that.
You know, so I feel like it's interesting how we sort of progress in our poetic journey, and where like I think there will be seasons and decades where my poetry will look very different than it does now in my life. And that's so exciting. We get to evolve like as poets, and I'm curious maybe perhaps how you have evolved and where you started and sort of where you see yourself now.
I love what you said, by the way, about play. I think part of that, I just want to like follow up on that for a split second. I think part of that has to do with the fact that you are so disciplined in your writing. Well, I can't speak for you, but I perceive you to be quite disciplined in your writing. And I think like anything, at first, when you're writing, you're learning how to write, and you're teaching yourself, and you're maybe reading other poets or taking workshops or classes where you're learning. But as you're learning, perhaps there are a lot of learning curves. But once you get to a point in your writing where you really understand how to break a line, or how to elicit a certain emotion, or you know, how to exactly say what you want to say, I think it can become more of a playful space, because and I've heard this about other jobs, like I've read books about this, about work. Like, find a job where like eventually it feels like play, because you've learned how to do it so well that you have the freedom to play. I think that's so cool. Yeah. Back to your question, you were asking about how my process has evolved, or my writing has evolved. So I think I probably wrote my first poem when I was 5 years old. That's generous, maybe 6.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah, I'm like, could I write well when I was 5? It was about a goat. It was, and I still have it. It says a silly Billy goat couldn't stay afloat, which like the silly Billy goat sounds so British to me. I was raised by like very English grandparents in part. Like we stayed with them a lot. So, but that rhyme scheme, pretty good. Like, you know, not bad not bad for a little child. And so I would write a lot growing up. Me and my sister would. We had some problems at home, and writing was an outlet for us, both of us. I have a twin sister, by the way. We were both really passionate about creative writing. We both like did creative writing club at school, and we're like really big keeners in all of our English and creative writing classes. And I was reading a lot then, like fiction and poetry. And it was just like I just fell in love with poetry. Like I fell in love with the language of poetry, but also the fact that for me, poetry, more than any other art form, like I said, it feels like a hand reaching out to you from the page. And like I read some poems that probably saved my life, when I was like a teenager, and you probably did
Absolutely.
too, right? And I was like, if somebody can do that for me, maybe I can do that for someone else. And that's where the empathy comes in again, I think. And then I stopped writing for a long time because I had used writing as a catharsis for like the struggles of my childhood and growing up. It began to feel difficult for me to write without it being associated with those bad feelings that I had growing up, the stress and the anxiety and the trauma. So I put down the pen for a really, really, really long time. I picked it up again in my late 20s. I have a super secret other Instagram account from my late 20s. The poems there were like kind of more Rupi Kaur wannabe, like female empowering, kind of short content based. I did that for about a year and a half until I realized that it just wasn't me. Like the content that I was putting out felt very content with a capital C, and it felt like I was very much like forcing myself to be on a timeline producing that. So I put down the pen again. And then honestly, it wasn't until after having my son, like 6 months after having Theo, that I started writing again. And like motherhood brought it back out in me, which was really cool.
I think that's so beautiful. I'm getting like just chills thinking about the feeling of liberating yourself from maybe a practice that wasn't you, and then rediscovering the love that you had, because the love was there, right? The love for poetry was there.
Yeah.
Just need to find that stream that felt right for you.
Yeah.
And motherhood sort of unlocked that for you in such a beautiful way. Do you find that there are poems you've written now that you would not have been able to write if you hadn't become a mother? And even if they're not like related to motherhood, do you find that it's like, has it opened your heart? Has it opened your soul? What do you think it's like kind of open for you?
Yeah, I definitely think yes. Like I do think that, again, like my empathy has blossomed. Like I love my son more than anything, but I have never required more empathy in my life
So hard.
than when I am supporting my son, who is almost 2. Like I tell my students at school, I have 30 students that barely speak English, and I tell them that I go to school to relax. That is my time off. And they laugh, and the mothers in the class especially laugh because they get it. And if you're a mom or a dad listening to this, you'll probably get it too. Like my son has a very intense personality. He's so smart. He's so curious. He's so lovable. With that comes like a turbulence to his personality. So
For sure.
I do think like with the empathy there, I've been able to broaden kind of the spectrum of writing, what I'm writing about thematically, being able to talk about motherhood, being able to talk about these different seasons of life that I've experienced. But maybe even more so than content, becoming a mother has changed the way that I view myself and the way that I approach and think about writing. Which I'll just keep talking, I guess.
Please,
it's kind of fun to think about this and to express this.
I was going to say, please elaborate on that. I'm so curious.
Yeah, so before I became a mom, I kept telling myself, and telling myself in very hushed tones, because to be honest with you, and I'm sure a lot of people will relate to this, I was scared to really pursue writing because I wanted it more than anything else. I wanted to be a poet more than anything else. But I had a really hard early life where my self-worth and my self-confidence was like dipped way below zero. And I have spent all of my 20s and like half of my 30s trying to rebuild myself to ground zero with my confidence. And I think becoming a mother more than anything, it made me realize that I thought I had all this time to be a writer. And now being a mother, I literally have no time at all. Like I go to work, I come home. My husband's amazing too. Like we tag team it, but you know, we need to entertain my son, our son, feed our son, bathe our son, help our son through the struggles of being an almost 2-year-old, support our son. And by the end of the day, you know, at like 8:30, we are both exhausted.
I can only imagine.
And there's barely any time at all to be a writer. And because of that, I was like, oh my God, I better start.
Yeah.
Like, there's barely any time to do this, so I better get started. Like, becoming a mom made me realize my time is finite. But it also, and I think like a line of my poetry that I wrote encapsulates this sentiment more than anything. I said, there was no room for my smallness anymore, only yours. I think having a baby, somebody to take care of outside of myself, and doing that successfully and with confidence and getting to where I am with my son made me like it boosted my confidence in myself and my realization that I only have today to pursue what I want to do, and also that I want to be my most authentic self for my son. Oh my God, I'm gonna cry. I want to be my most authentic self for my son so that I lead by example for him, because I really feel that what the world needs more than anything else is just people living by their compass, you know? And I want that for him. And I couldn't preach that to him in later life when he would understand it. I wouldn't have felt right without living that myself. So just a lot of revelations, you know?
Oh. It's so encouraging to me to talk to you about this, because of the poets that I know that are also mothers, most of them have said very similar things to you, which are motherhood has made me a better writer. Motherhood has blossomed my creativity. I write more now that I'm a mother than when I wasn't a mother. And as someone who is not a mother yet, I don't have children, and I would love to have children one day, or a child at least. I think there's a fear often. I mean, there's a fear just in general for becoming a mother. Like, what's my life going to look like? Am I going to ever be able to go on vacation again? Like all of these things we think about before we have children. And one of my biggest fears as someone who makes a living from my writing is that I will not have the time and the energy to be a great writer. And so I'm nervous about that. But talking to other poets who are also mothers has incredibly encouraged me, like beyond worlds. And I feel very confident in myself right now that once I become a mother, that my poetry will probably look different. Maybe Gather will look a little different for a while, but I know that there's a place and a space for motherhood in my journey as well. And so I just want to say thank you for saying that, because I think oftentimes it's easy to focus on all of the things that are harder, and they're there. Like, that is so valid, obviously.
And life is harder.
It is.
My life is harder now. But I don't want to interrupt you.
No, it's okay.
But I'm really feeding off what you're saying. Along with being harder, my life and my experience and my perception of the world is deeper. And because I'm seeing it through his eyes also.
I love that.
And oh God. But like, in like a weird way, in a way you don't understand until you maybe experience it. But because of that like added challenge, but also that added depth to my life, like my writing has expanded. I think I'm able to, again, speaking about empathy, be empathetic to a number of different things that maybe I couldn't quite understand, particularly parenthood and motherhood, but other things as well, just because my perspective on so many things has changed by virtue of having a child. And I feel like I'm like a little like archaeologist, and I'm like able to dig deeper. You know, like now I don't really even quite know how to explain it, but I'm hoping people listening might know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I think just in general, having bigger and vaster experiences, whether it's having children or even traveling or staying in different places, like one of my favorite pieces of writing advice is put down the pen and go live your life so that you have something to write about.
I feel like I also said that when you asked me some questions about writing for the other interview. I feel like I also said that.
Yeah,
yes,
just go live your life. Like, you need things to write about. So, you know, I think that's good advice. I was going to say something else. A theme that I've noticed as well, talking to different poets and talking to them about their poetic journey, and I very much relate as well, is this idea of like a tender urgency. And so for your journey, it sounds like the tender urgency was, I am a mother now. I have finite time. I need to use this time to like the best of my ability.
Yeah.
And talking to some other poets, maybe it's a job change or a career change, a move across the country or something.
Or a breakup.
Yeah, a breakup, something like that, right? I think it's important as writers to find that tender urgency. What is pushing you? It doesn't have to be something that's hurting you. It could be a good tender urgency, but something to give us a little push, because as humans, I think sometimes we love to stay in that homeostasis environment. And writing, I think sometimes you need the ability to go a little bit beyond, not so far that you're completely out of your comfort zone, but I always say in Gather, like when I'm teaching a lesson, try to push to that 1%, right? Try this form that you haven't tried yet. Try chopping your lines in half when you normally write really long lines, and maybe you'll hate it. Maybe that's not you, and that's totally okay. But like finding something to just get you out of that homeostasis is, I think, where there's like so much richness. I think poets sometimes just need that sort of extra little push to get them across the finish line. And that sort of ties into the idea too of perhaps discipline and getting things done as poets. Sometimes I think we're creative folks and that's not our strong suit, but it can be very rewarding to start a project and then finish it and, have something sort of pushing you along.
Yeah.
Speaking of projects, I know you're working on an anthology right now. I'm really curious about that. Tell us how that started and what it's all about.
Yeah, thank you. So it started with me writing some poems myself based on facts, mostly scientific, mostly biological facts about the natural world. I am a writer. I am an English teacher. I'm also a huge biology nerd. I always have been. Like, I'm a wildlife photographer. I'm a birder. I can listen outside and tell you what 10 different bird species are calling. It's like very cool ancient knowledge that I've trained myself in. So I'm really, really passionate about the natural world and biology. So I started, I like to read about biology and interesting facts about the living world. So I started writing poems, like upon learning that butterflies can't see their wings, for example.
That's such a good one. Oh my God.
I know. Or upon learning that there are more trees on the planet than stars in the sky, for example, like true facts. I started writing them myself. And then I invited my poetry community on Instagram, which isn't huge, but I have like a really good relationship with a lot of writers on there. I invited them to participate. And I'd say about like 20 poets posted poems based on other interesting facts, mostly also about biology, wildlife, the natural world. And then I thought to myself, hey, people seem to really like this prompt, and they've been telling me that they really like this prompt. Why don't I make an anthology? And one of the ideas behind the anthology also was that there's a barrier to entry for a lot of people when it comes to reading and writing poetry. I find a lot of my friends that I talk to who aren't really into poetry, if I ask them why not, they'll say because they feel like it's not for them. They feel locked out by the language, the complexity sometimes of the language, or maybe really esoteric, lofty ideas behind the writing, and they just feel like they can't relate to it. I have always tried, especially in this recent couple of years of writing, to really write poetry that's very clear, clear language, and like simple in a sense, honestly for my sake, but also from an accessibility standpoint, so that everyone feels like they can find something in my poetry. And I just found that this prompt, upon learning something, was an interesting window into writing and reading poetry, because maybe you don't always like poetry, but like most people like random trivia, and a lot of people love science. I am such an arts and science girl, and I feel like we need arts and science more than ever in the world, and true, real, authentic science, not science that some quasi-experts or non-experts is sharing. So I wanted to put together this anthology based on real facts, and it ended up being that 99% of people who submitted facts about the natural world. So it's really skewed in that direction. Poetry based on facts about nature. And oh my God, these poems are incredible.
Oh, I
they
can't
are
wait.
incredible. Like poets who I love, who have always written on different themes, submitted poems to me that blew my mind. People that I know who have never written a poem in their lives, and people who I don't know who admitted this to me, wrote poems that blew my mind. And so it was really beautiful in receiving all these and starting to like kind of put together the final count on the poems I'd accepted, to realize that this little theory I had that using this prompt could make poetry more accessible, that it actually did.
Yeah.
Like one of my best friends who is not a poet, she's a scientist, submitted a poem to the anthology, and like I said to myself I would be objective, you know, I'm not going to accept this just because this person is a good friend of mine.
For sure.
But the poem was amazing.
Oh
like anyone would have accepted it, you know, and she wouldn't call herself a poet.
Sure.
So because I'm a teacher, I'm not having a lot of time to work on that right now. I have compiled all the poems. It's a lot of poems.
Wow.
And I'll be putting it together in the summer, hopefully to come out at the end of the summer.
Oh my goodness. First of all, congratulations. Like, it's not a small thing. First of all, it's not a small thing to notice that when people are writing to your prompts, hey, like all of these poems could it takes an eye to notice what curation of poems would come together beautifully in an anthology. That's a skill. And I think you have a really good eye for that, especially in your first collection. The combination, the way you've curated your poems, the order of the poems is very strategic. It's very beautiful, and it flows so gorgeously. And I'm truly really excited for this anthology. I have a poem in it. I'm so excited. Can I say the name of the poem?
Yes.
Upon learning that dogs can also get endometriosis.
And it's so good. And what a fact. Like, the incredible thing about these poems, there are many incredible things. One of the incredible things is that you get to learn something really cool and then read a really good poem. You know, I was like, I can't think of anything I would love more. Like, I'm such a sucker for interesting facts.
It's the perfect coffee table poetry book.
Yeah.
The perfect coffee table. I'm like, people are going to have this on their coffee tables.
I hope
and it's going to be well loved and I think it's one of those things too that's evergreen, right? It never goes out of style. The earth never goes out of style. And learning about the earth and where we are and who we are in relation to the earth via poetry is so smart.
I think so too. And I think, like, inadvertently, though there were some poems like related to conservation for sure, inadvertently, just through so many of these poems being about truly singular and amazing facts about nature, this book is again like a love letter to our planet in the way that I wanted my first book to be. And I love that, again, through community, through the voices of so many of these poets who I know, who I love, who are so talented, that we're creating something like this. Like, it's so wonderful.
It's truly a testament to the power of what happens when a great group of people come together and write in community. And I think that's one of the things that, if someone were to ask me, like, what's the number one thing you've learned in the past 5 years of writing poetry? For me, it truly and honestly is, and not just in sort of a clickbaity way, or maybe that's not the right word, but like a pop word. What's that word? A buzzword. A buzzword.
A pop word.
A pop word.
I love that.
I'm dying. That's so funny. And now I'm laughing, and my point was really serious.
Okay, go back to it.
I really think, not in a buzzword way, community is the key to everything. And I think, as someone who went to accounting school, I never got to find my poetry people in accounting school. They were not there, unfortunately.
Surprise.
I never found really, like, I'm not friends with a lot of people from that program because they weren't my people, you know? And so poetry has given me something that I'm forever going to be grateful for, which is meeting, like, other people who are like me. And I really needed that at a time in my life, like 4 or 5 years ago, when I started meeting people online and connecting with them. I didn't realize how fundamental this would be. This is my whole life now, Alex. Like, isn't that insane?
I think it's amazing.
In the best way.
And I'm gonna embarrass you that I literally talk about you more than you even know to my husband and to my friends and to everyone, being like, my friend Maria, like, she's incredible. The things that she's doing that literally just like have sprung from her beautiful mind and like she's made them into reality. Like it's really inspiring. And I think you're so right about community. Like our community, like, which like both of us found maybe through Instagram. There are still some good things left on that platform. Thank God. It's the people and
For
the poems.
sure. It is the people and the poems.
But community there is so big, and like the gathered community is so supportive, and like having that weekly meetup where we share poems, we write poems, you know, we support each other is like so fundamental, because writing poetry, being a writer can be lonely.
It can,
if you don't have that community. And I'm not good at lonely. Like I am an extrovert. I'm like a weird little extrovert poet. And like, if it was just a practice that I was doing by myself, like at a desk day in and day out, there's no way. Like, I'd be gone. Bye. No.
You mean we don't get to have poetry parties?
I know. I need poetry parties. Like, I need them. But now I have, I'd say, like 50 people on Instagram who I can just kind of shoot the shit with about what we wrote, or like a theme we're working on, or like something we read, or a friend who's inspiring us right now. And that's been something that I've built, and same for you, you know, and that is an ever-growing community. But like, it's really cool.
It is. It's truly phenomenal. And I think it really is underrated. I often get people asking me, and not in a way to be like, oh, Maria has a massive amount of Instagram followers, but I often get people.
But she does.
Anyways, that's besides the point. I'm trying to be humble.
I will brag on your behalf for you.
Thank you. But I often get the question, how do I grow on Instagram? And I find that question really hard to answer, like in an ethical way, because all I want to say is like, don't be an asshole. Be nice to people. But
good advice in general.
People want an answer like, post your poems at 9:30 a.m. Eastern time, or they want an answer like, you know, post your poem in Times New Roman 0.12 font. But like, that's really like, nobody can give you an exact formula. I really think the best advice is to find your people, connect with them, and then you're gonna have fun doing it. And like, what's the point? What's the point?
And
right?
like, even like, do I beat myself up sometimes that like my following isn't as big as I would like it to be? I do, but then I remind myself constantly that that's not actually why I'm there.
For
like
sure.
I am there because I have always felt called to like to share.
For sure.
My photography, my poetry. And I think that does have something to do with my extroversion. Like, I'm somebody who, if I create something, I want other people to see it and maybe be able to relate to it. And
I think that dialogue is really, really important. And I think folks sometimes forget too that having a large amount of people that follow you but aren't connected to your work is a lot less valuable than one might think. Like, I think sometimes we need to look through the smoke and mirrors and know that like people, the one thing that comes with a large amount of people that follow you is a lot of people unfollow you too. Yeah. And I'm not talking about a little, I'm talking about a lot. Like on the regular, if anyone is curious about my Instagram analytics, I almost lose as many followers every month as I gain. Like, it's almost the exact same amount. So that's like, you're losing like sometimes upwards of 10,000 followers. Yeah. That's a lot of people to lose, you know what I mean? So I guess what I'm trying to say is it can look a certain way from the outside until you sort of dig in and then notice that, oh, that's actually not exactly what's going on.
It is what it is. Like, I at the end of the day, I feel like there are things that have happened to me so far in my poetry career, which has been very short, like basically a year and a half long, where I've really committed to this. But there are things that have already started happening to me that to me are so much more exciting than having like a huge following on Instagram. Like, for example, I had a student, I believe she's in Southeast Asia somewhere, but she reached out to me asking if she could write an essay for her university class about my poetry. And, you know, the imposter syndrome in me was almost like, me? What? Who? No? And I even at one point said to her, maybe you would prefer Mary Oliver. I even said that because I was like, I feel like not enough of my work is published for you to reference it, da 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 da. And she was like, what a lovely person. Asifa, if you're watching this, thank you. She said to me, there are so many essays already about Mary Oliver. I want to write about Alex Dawson. And I was like,
that's such a lovely thing to say.
It was so touching, and I shared about that in my personal friends' stories that was happening, and a few people reached out saying that's such like a high compliment to your writing. You know,
really
like
is.
It really is. And another fun thing that has happened also is that a friend of a friend found my page and reached out to me about turning one of my poems, composing one of my poems into a choral piece for a choir out in British Columbia, and that will be being performed in 2 weeks.
Oh my
goodness.
goodness.
She sent me the audio recording of it, and it's so cool. And to have another artist be so inspired by your work that they feel motivated to make art in a completely different avenue of art is so cool. And from that, actually, another, I don't know if anything will come of it, but another choir, I think like chair of a choir in Ottawa has reached out to me and been potentially interested in using some of my poems for choral pieces. And I'm like, am I becoming a lyricist? Like completely by accident? Which is a job I've always thought was like extremely cool, you know? And just the little things like that can happen to you, and I'm sure they've happened to you also as your career is kind of starting to snowball, only a little bit right now, but we'll see where she goes. You know, those things are so special because they're unanticipated. Like
for sure, yeah.
Both of those things that happened were total surprises that just came by virtue of the fact that I found the courage to start sharing my poetry again and to start really pursuing it. And I love serendipity. I write a lot about it. And I think that there's just so much magic in that.
I think you're so right. It's magic is what it is. And it's like that avenue. You never know, like you can share on social media. That doesn't have to be your focus. It can just be an avenue to lead you to other things, right?
Yeah.
Like it can just be a bridge to walk across it. It need not be the journey, the destination, right?
Yeah.
Like it can just serve its purpose for you and what feels good for you. And I think each person has a different thing that can be for them, and it doesn't have to be the same thing for everyone.
Yeah, and just like the unexpected elements of that journey as like a spontaneous person and not somebody who necessarily enjoys just like walking the straight and narrow. I've found such thrill and delight in like these opportunities popping up that I never anticipated. Like I think it's so fun and is such a compliment to me.
And that's truly, I think, the power of poetry is just for it to connect us in ways like art to art, right? Different modes of art, the music to the poetry to the visual artwork. Like all of it is art, and we're all just sort of in here smorgasbording it all and enjoying each other's art.
Yeah, and through that building community, artistic community, which again, I feel like we need so much right now. Like people, especially now, really rely on their creative communities to like support them and like to find an outlet for their voice of whatever they're experiencing in the present moment. So yeah, it's just been so cool. Hopefully we'll continue to be cool in new and interesting ways.
I really
like doing a podcast with you.
Absolutely. Well, it has been such an absolute treasure. I was going to say pleasure and a treat, and I said treasure.
Treasure is the perfect poetic word here. Treasure.
It has been a treasure to chat with you, Alex. Thank you so much for coming all the way from Toronto to my humble little town and in filming this and recording it. I wanted to, speaking of social media, just give an opportunity for you to share where folks can connect with you online if they're looking to read your work.
Thank you. So I am at Alex Daw Creates, AlexDaw Creates, on Instagram and on Substack. Substack, I'm sharing a lot of my poetry along with like shorter form essays on various things, and then wildlife photography and poetry on Instagram.
So exciting. Well, make sure you connect with Alex's work and stay tuned for her upcoming anthology. Upon learning that, very excited. I'm gonna have a poem published in it. I know some friends, some Gather friends, have some poems published in there as well.
So exciting.
I just want to say thanks again for being here, Alex, and I'm sure we'll do this again soon. Chat soon.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Maria, for hosting this and for inviting poets to, share about what they're doing. I think that's so wonderful, continuing to build the community and support each other. Thank you. And yes, we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Amazing. All right. Well, that's all for us today on the Gather podcast. Stay tuned for another episode coming in a few weeks. Ta-ta.